I would love to share with you some of the mistakes that I've seen in the raw food world over the years and some of the mistakes that I've made over my years of being into raw food. And so you could just better navigate some of the pitfalls that can happen when we become too excessive about any one way of doing things. And the first thing I've seen is more of a rigid mindset, kind of the all or nothing mindset that happens with a lot of people. It definitely happened with me early on. And typically this is like a newcomer's paradigm. When we get into raw food, we kind of get into the zealotry of it in some cases. We get into almost like a religious ideal. And it's really important not to really get too wrapped up in that, because food makes a great spiritual practice, but it makes a horrible religion. And so we don't want to become like a zealot about it, where we're becoming too rigid, where it's all raw food, and if we have any kind of cooked food or we have anything else, then somehow we are not following the program. Somehow we are doing something wrong, and we end up beating ourselves up about it. And that's something we never want to do, because that creates more toxic effects in our metabolism, more metabolic toxins, than eating any kind of cooked food or anything is actually degrading our spirit by thinking negatively about other people, or more so about ourselves, when we do something that isn't necessarily in alignment with a certain paradigm or a rigid approach that we are trying to adopt in the sake of good health. So I find that it's actually better that we take more of a 70-30 or 80-20 approach. 70-80% of your diet should be, raw plant food and your favorite raw foods for that matter. And then 20% cooked foods that you enjoy, or something like that, some kind of ratio like that, but something that's a little more in balance. And you can move on from there as you feel it appropriate. Okay, and the next thing I see is excessive cleansing. Then this has been a big thing over the years that I've noticed, is just this excessive focus with cleansing. It's very similar to like the all or nothing idea, where we sometimes can become very phobic of the toxicity in our world, and we start to get to this like toxicological mindset where we think everything is toxic, everything is going to poison us, and we have to continue to cleanse until we become completely emptied out. And we've all seen that archetype where someone becomes anorexically thin, they become kind of gaunt, sucked in, their cheeks are sucked in. In fact, that actually happened to me during the first year of my raw food cleansing, because I didn't really understand the proper nutrient ratios and macronutrient ratios for me. So I was kind of doing high fruit and tons of salads and vegetable juice, and it's all good, but it wasn't properly balanced. And I know a lot of people that have been cleansing for like 5, 10, 14 years, and they're still going. And so it's really important that we create equilibrium, we create balance in our nutritional approach, right? And just make sure that we're staying in an even balance for ourselves. Remember the saying, head in the clouds, feet on the ground, right? Dreaming in the clouds, but our feet are on the ground. We want to be in our body, when we want to be able to feel our body while we're dreaming and creating visions and astral traveling and all that cool stuff, right? That comes along with, lightening the density of our diet. The next thing I see is a lot of people getting into raw food tend to binge a lot on dried food, right? So like nuts and seeds and dried fruit in general tend to be those like almost like snack food substitutes, which is a great upgrade in the transition phases, but eventually we don't want to use too much dried food as our snack all the time. And the best way to actually counterbalance the dried food binges is to eat actually more water-rich food. So that can be your favorite fruits. That can be apples, that can be green apples, that can be red apples, that can be watermelon, that can be seeded grapes, that can be berries of all kinds, right? a lot of other things, pears, persimmons, melons, that kind of thing. And actually moving a little away from dried fruit, more towards water-rich fruit. And then also things like celery, cucumbers, tomatoes, things that are very water-rich, because they start to rehydrate the system and actually cause you to not want all the dried food. A lot of the dried food addictions that we have, a lot of it actually has to do with dehydration, the constant binging and binging and binging. Dr. Batman Gailage wrote the book Your Body's Many Cries for Water, and he actually made the statement that most of the time you're not hungry, you're actually thirsty. So a lot of times we have a misidentification of our food requirements, and we're reaching out for dried food, but really we need water and water-rich food, and then actually everything is just cool, everything's good. Don't feel like I have to go binge or anything. Or you can do the alkaline acidic combination, where you take almond butter or you take tahini butter and you get celery and you mix the two. You dip your celery in, and now you have your dried acid-based kind of food, right? Your acidic mineral-based food, your phosphorus-rich food, and you have your sodium-rich food, which is also alkaline and water-rich, being celery, and you mix those two together, and that's a great way to upgrade the raw food snack routine. The next thing I see a lot is there's too much of a focus on food. I mean, I myself, I was neurotic about food for a long time until I realized, whoa, my whole life is dominated by what I do and don't eat. And what ends up happening with a lot of people is that they become so hyper neurotic about their food and so food phobic that they end up thinking in terms of the negative. Their whole life is posed in the negative. This is the cleansing thing too. This is the excessive cleansing thing, where we're always thinking of the negative. We're always thinking in a reductionist, a subtraction type of nature. I got to remove this, I got to remove this. And then eventually there's a very few options to choose from. And then we become kind of orthorexic. Orthorexia is the clinical term for food obsessions, right? Where people are just hyper obsessed about food to the point where they that's all they can think about. And if you've been in the organic, whole food, raw food, vegan, vegetarian, paleo world, whatever camp you subscribe to or don't subscribe to, it's all there. Everyone's focused on food, but what we don't focus on is, how about the movement diet? Right? More important than food most of the time is actually being mobile, getting the mobility of your neuromuscular system, opening up, practicing yoga, practicing weight-bearing exercise, practicing sprinting, going hiking, tuning into nature, that kind of thing. The food is an adjunct. Remember, food is fuel for your purpose. But we can't forget about the purpose. The purpose is some form of activity, some form of doing, moving, something like that, right? We're actually in some form of activity, and the food is fuel to actually help us do more of that, not to do less of that and think and focus more on food. So I've seen that happen a lot, and that's happened to me, and that's why I'm conveying it the way I am, because the hyper-neurotic behavior is the downfall of every I don't even know the word. It's the downfall of everything. There's some kind of psychological, psychosomatic addiction to an excessive behavior that's drawn far out of its appropriate context into some kind of extremism. And it just becomes this neurotic holding pattern that, in my opinion and in my observation, is far more detrimental to your health than it would be to have some form of cooked food or processed food even once in a while. If that floats your boat, it's a lot better to do that than to become hyper neurotic and psychosclerotic about food than not. Okay, anyways, you can tell that's like a pet peeve of mine. All right, so the last thing I want to mention is, especially when it comes to raw food, what I've noticed is that there's two extremes. There's binging on fat dominant foods and binging on sugar dominant foods, right? And so I actually feel like both are probably inappropriate most of the time. Some people have a unique metabolism. They're a fast oxidizer, meaning that they have a fast metabolic oxidation rate. They metabolize fat very more efficiently. They're able to subsist on fat dominant food a lot longer as a dominant energy source. It balances their blood sugar. And they're able to focus longer, right? They're able to keep energy up. Then some people are slow oxidizers. They metabolize sugar more efficiently. They don't process fat quite as well. They get a little more lethargic. They can't digest and metabolize, assimilate fat as well. So they actually run better on carbohydrates, right? It's just the way it is. So some people end up leaning way far into one end of the spectrum. And my personal opinion is eventually you want to find yourself into a sub-oxidation rate, which is meaning that you balance your macronutrient ratios, meaning you're balanced with your fat, your carbohydrates, and your protein somewhere in that mix. The dominant fuel sources of metabolism are fat and carbohydrates and sugar. Protein is not really for fuel. Protein is more for construction. It's more for maintenance. It's more for repairing musculature and tendons and ligaments and neuropeptides and brain tissue and myelin as well. That's more what protein is for, and also for blood sugar. It's not really a specific fuel source. Fat and carbs are. So remember, understanding where you fit on that ratio, what you get more out of in terms of long, sustainable energy, not just like flickers of energy, not just like burning a piece of paper in a fire and getting a flame, but I mean something like a log that you actually consistently get energy on where you're not having to eat all the time. If you figure that out, then you can have a dominant, a little more higher ratio of that fat or that sugar, but balancing it out is really key. Not being too far this way or too far that way. Okay, so those are the main problems I see in the raw food diets at large, and the biggest mistakes that I see other people make and that I've made myself. And yeah, there you go.